All right. We good to get started here, Tyler?
Yep. Yep. Good to
All
go.
right. Great. Well, we've got some people trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started as it's right at 2 o'clock Eastern. So first of all, hey, everybody. Thanks for jumping on today. I'm Steve McCann, managing partner at CloudServus. We're teaming up with Brian at FLOAT FinOps for this session, and we're pumped that you've joined us. If you feel like your cloud spend may be a little bit out of control, or maybe your engineering teams are flying blind when it comes to governance, you're not alone. This is a common struggle across our customer base. So, and frankly, that balance between giving teams freedom to build and still keeping things efficient isn't easy. And so that's why we've got Brian Guru from Float FinOps. They're one of our strategic partners and provide a ton of value to our Azure customers today. So Brian's got a bunch of practical advice, and he's going to walk us through helping customers like yours improve visibility to their spend, build smarter guardrails, and avoid wasted spend in Azure. So with that said, appreciate y'all's time, and I'll hand it over to you, Brian.
Steve, really appreciate the intro. We're really excited about the partnership with CloudServus and super excited about the topic that we have today. I know we've got a good group that's joining, and hopefully quite a few more that maybe missed this will have a chance to catch the recording. We do have quite a bit of content that I'm trying to pack in here, so I will minimize the introductions here and jump right in. So thanks everyone for joining. Again, we're excited about the partnership with CloudServus, and we're passionate about this topic, which is really about how to achieve operational and financial efficiency in Microsoft Azure. So as you guys know, many companies rush to the cloud for agility and scale, but now managing costs and keeping engineers efficient is really becoming a major challenge. So today we're going to walk through some best practices on how to gain better real-time visibility and how to put smart controls or guardrails in place that empower cloud engineers to work freely while ensuring optimization and security. So to kick things off, I want to highlight a few key terms that we'll talk throughout the webinar. You may or may not be familiar with them, but I think what you'll see is how when these all become aligned, it really becomes this source of real, true cloud efficiency. So the first term is cloud operations or cloud ops. Cloud ops is the set of practices, tools, and processes to manage, monitor, and optimize cloud environments for performance, availability, security, and cost efficiency. This ensures that your cloud infrastructure runs reliably and aligns with business goals. It's probably something that you guys already have in practice, but there's a lot of different, I guess, intricacies within cloud ops that we can touch on today. So the second topic is FinOps. FinOps is the practice of bringing together finance, engineering, and business teams to take shared responsibility for cloud spending. FinOps enables organizations to gain visibility into usage and costs and make data-driven decisions and optimize cloud investments for maximum business value. It's not all just about cost savings, and I think you'll see that today. The third term is the Azure Well-Architected Framework. The Azure Well-Architected Framework is Microsoft's stated set of best practices and guiding principles that help organizations design, build, and secure high-performing, resilient, and cost-efficient workloads. There are 5 key pillars within the Azure Well-Architected Framework. Those are cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, and security. And these pillars help cloud leaders assess their environments. They also help them identify risks and prioritize improvements that align with business goals. So if we zoom out for a moment, if you're a cloud leader, you're likely navigating a fast-moving environment where agility, security, cost control, and performance all matter, but often these are competing for attention within the organization. That's where these three disciplines that we just touched on come into play. where CloudOps is all about running your cloud smoothly and reliably. It's kind of the engine room that makes sure your applications are up, scalable, and secure without unnecessary manual effort or risk. FinOps brings the cost visibility and shared accountability. It really makes sure that every dollar spent on the cloud has a purpose, and it bridges the gap between engineering and finance to drive smarter, faster decisions that are grounded in real-time data and usage patterns. And then the well-architected framework is the blueprint. So when you have CloudOps and FinOps that are rooted in this blueprint, you can use that for designing, reviewing, and evolving the architecture across those 5 pillars that we just mentioned. Each one of these has its own lens, but when all 3 are aligned, they all serve this one common goal, which is to maximize the business value of your cloud investment. And this is what we really mean by cloud efficiency. It's not just about saving money, but getting the most value, agility, and innovation per every dollar spent. And when you align your teams around these principles, you can unlock scale, governance, and cost control without slowing innovation. So in almost every Azure environment we dig into, these same patterns appear again and again. They're not just technical problems that an organization is facing. They're really process-driven issues that create a perfect storm for kind of out-of-control cloud and cloud spend. Some of those common themes are there's often a lack of organizational standards. Teams are moving fast, but without consistent guidelines for accountability. Infrastructure as code is either missing or inconsistently applied, which means that environments are manually created, poorly documented, and they're hard to manage. And perhaps most critically, org-wide visibility is low. Finance can't see or understand what's driving cost. Engineers don't have tools surfaced in their workflows, and leadership gets reactive alerts after budgets are blown. And with this decentralized decision making of cloud teams, with a lack of governance and chargeback models, optimization becomes nearly impossible. So at Float, we can help address these challenges with a modern FinOps approach that really bridges people, process, and tools.
Yeah, Brian, if I can jump in just to provide some color commentary.
Sure.
We have a bunch of Azure customers and we manage their Azure spend. It's very rare for IT departments that we work with to actually tell us that they feel like they have their Azure cost under control, and for all the reasons that Brian just mentioned. So oftentimes when we dig in, there's some very simple things such as an engineer over in Europe maybe spun up a VM that was really resource intensive and cost intensive, and we don't need it anymore. Those are the easy wins. But we want to quickly move beyond those, get those initial cost savings, and then move into more of what Brian's talking about, which is why we felt it was so important to have this webinar, because again, not many of our customers feel like they have this under control. So just wanted to provide that color commentary for you and make sure that people on this webinar understand that if you're feeling that way, you're certainly not alone, as I mentioned in the intro.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate you providing that. It's very common. It's almost in every single environment we see, and that's why we're really passionate about it, because we really want to turn this from kind of like an after the fact identifying where there may be waste and opportunities to like with some of the tools I'll bring here in a minute, talk about how when you establish those guardrails, it really takes a proactive approach. And so cloud leaders can be more confident in setting those guardrails and then unleashing their engineers to go and do the things that they need without worrying about risk or making mistakes. So this, I guess, before I get there, I want to talk about visibility. And everything we're talking about here, everything that I'll show you today is all native Microsoft Azure tools. So when we talk about gaining better control and visibility into the cloud environment, it's important to remember that you don't have to start from scratch. Microsoft provides a number of native tools designed to support FinOps and governance initiatives. So here's 4 of them that are kind of the top of the list for us. So the first is probably one that most have seen, which is cost management, and specifically the cost analysis tool, where you can visualize your costs and usage patterns. The second is Azure Advisor. And, depending on what your experience has been with Azure Advisor, some people think, it doesn't really have enough context to be valuable to us. But what I want to show you is a couple of different Azure Advisor workbooks that we think are really valuable. These can serve to surface actionable optimization recommendations. And then probably one of the most powerful tools at your fingertips for visibility is called Resource Graph Explorer. So I'm excited to kind of dig in a little bit there. Essentially, with Resource Graph Explorer, you can perform advanced querying across your resources. And so there's some, it's just a really powerful tool to be able to instantly get information about resources within your environment. And then lastly, everybody probably is already aware of tagging and has some semblance of tagging within their environment. Really, tags are the foundation for accountability, as they bring kind of the metadata to each of the resources that can then be used later for costs, visibility, chargebacks, automation. It can be used in a number of different ways. So let me start first with Azure Cost Analysis. So Azure Cost Analysis is really the foundation for understanding how your organization is spending in Azure. With this tool, which I'm going to jump into, at least from a screenshot perspective, you can break down costs by resource, subscription, service, location, tag. I mean, it's really kind of limitless in terms of how you can slice and dice this data. So for example, as you can see, you can view your accumulated costs and then forecast costs and see that on a chart against a budget, for example. This is a very basic view. You can also use this as a historical look back tool, and depending on whatever the dates are that you want to be able to view, or you can actually kind of forecast those, as I mentioned. Now, I want to show you a couple of my favorite views. One of those is you can view your Azure costs by service. So if you want to understand what the storage costs are, maybe for a specific region, or the storage costs across the entire subscription, this view is going to help you get that level of detail. Same thing at virtual machines. If you want to see specific series of virtual machines, once again, this will help you visualize where the specific costs by service are coming from. And then the last one I'll highlight in cost analysis, my personal favorite, is to be able to view costs by specific resource. So by resource name, if you will. So think about being able to see a cost over a specific time period associated with a single resource. So this may be a virtual machine, for example. If you have a virtual machine, it's also got maybe an OS cost to it. It's got networking costs associated with it. And so when you view the cost by the actual resource, you can actually expand that view to see the individualized costs for the OS or for the associated networking costs specific to that VM. So it's a really powerful visualization tool to see your costs in that way. So the next place I want to spend just a minute is the Azure Advisor workbooks. So there's actually 3 workbooks that they're listed in preview, but they're pretty reliable, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. The first is the cost optimization workbook. So the cost optimization workbook I think of as really kind of a FinOps starter kit. This is going to give you a level of visibility across the scopes that you've enabled this workbook to see things within your environment, specific recommendations for rate optimization, usage optimization, and they even jump into some security and reliability recommendations as well. This is not a comprehensive workbook at this point, but it is something that is useful to get some basic recommendations. So I would recommend, taking a look and playing around. A couple of my favorite things to look at within this workbook are, let's just say, under the compute and the storage sections. So in the compute, you can see if there are virtual machines that are in a stop state, they haven't been deallocated, so you're still paying for the hardware. This is typically something that is an inadvertent action taken, or maybe it's an automatic action where the OS is shut down for within the virtual machine, but that does not actually deallocate the hardware. If you don't deallocate the hardware, you're still paying for that virtual machine, even though it's inaccessible. The other section that I wanted to just briefly touch on was in storage, where you can see storage accounts which are not yet upgraded to version 2 and unattached managed disks. So these are things, again, that become kind of low-hanging fruit for teams to be able to visualize what recommendations and what resources are impacted. So the second advisor workbook that I'll touch on briefly again is this service retirement workbook. So everybody on here has probably received an email announcing some sort of retirement or deprecation of an Azure service. It happens all the time. There's new services coming on board. There's old services being retired. But the challenge is, oftentimes when you get that email, the first question you ask is, okay, well, how does this impact me? How does this impact my resources? And so what this advisor workbook does is it actually summarizes all of the different services that are set for retirement, including a retirement date. And then it'll actually show you the resources within the scope that you've defined. It'll show you the resources that are impacted. So now you can plan for any changes that need to be made well out in advance of the actual retirement dates. And it's not a fire drill at, as those dates loom and close in to make changes and disrupt other priorities. So the next tool, again, is probably my favorite tool out of these four. It's the Resource Graph Explorer. So the Resource Graph Explorer is like I guess it's really one of my go-to tools, but it's basically like a search engine within your environment. So when you need a powerful way to explore and query your environment, this is kind of the go-to tool. It uses what's called Kusto Query Language, or KQL, to find resources, and you can filter by tag or property or even audit configurations. This is especially helpful when you're asking questions. For example, how many VMs are running in the East US without tags, or which resources haven't been modified in 6 months, or where are we missing our backup or security policies. So when you create these queries and you apply those to the scope that you're looking within, it'll return a set of results back that you can then use to then prioritize any changes or things within your environment that you need. The last tool is Azure Tags. So Azure Tags are really the unsung hero of cloud visibility and accountability. So when consistently applied, tags help to group resources by owner, environment, application, or cost center. And of course, this is helpful in enabling accurate showback and chargeback to other stakeholders within the business. And it really drives accountability. So one of the most powerful capabilities of tagging is that it enables governance at scale. What that means is, when I jump into Azure policy here, many of the Azure policies are tag aware. That means you can enforce behavior or apply controls based on those tag values. So the more well-defined and standardized you have your tagging nomenclature and standards, the more valuable they are going to be in terms of some of these other tool sets. So all of these tools are built into Azure and available to all Azure customers. And when used together, they become really a powerful system. But the best part is you can start using all of them today at no cost. There's no third-party tool required. They're already enabled in your subscriptions. So I highly recommend jumping in and doing some learning and then going and actually playing around with these tools yourself. So that was visibility. Now I want to shift into governance or guardrails. For the sake of this slide, we're going to use the term bumper lanes, and we're not here to improve your bowling game, although it is kind of a fitting metaphor. But in cloud environments, these bumper lanes represent governance and guardrails. Things like Azure policies, role-based access controls, and tagging standards. They're not about limiting innovation. They're about empowering engineers to move fast with confidence and know that there are essentially safety mechanisms already in place. If you think about it like taking your kid to the bowling alley and putting the bumper lanes up, they roll the ball down the lane with full enthusiasm without worrying about, a gutter ball. They're focused on hitting the pins. They're not focused on the risks. And so the same kind of applies in cloud operations. When guardrails are clearly defined, engineers don't have to second guess if they're deploying resources correctly. Security and cost standards are automatically enforced. You can reduce the risk without creating bottlenecks. So the goal is not control for control's sake. It's autonomy with alignment. You're creating a system where engineers can operate at speed within the boundaries of organizational best practices. And when you do that well, you don't just prevent mistakes, you actually unlock performance. And so as we continue this conversation, think about what guardrails you guys might be missing and what your teams can do with a little bit more guidance and a little less friction. So I want to touch on these tools highlighted here. I want to spend the most time on Azure policy because I think that one applies most broadly for this discussion. And we'll spend the next few minutes diving into how Azure policy allows you to enforce standards, audit resources, and automatically remediate non-compliance, whether it's controlling which VM SKUs can be deployed or enforcing tags for cost tracking. Azure policy is one of the most powerful and cost-free governance tools in your arsenal. Azure resource providers at a high level can define what resources and capabilities can be provisioned in a subscription. You can use them to restrict access to specific services that are not required or approved. For example, machine learning. So if there's no benefit or use in your environments for machine learning, it's a huge cost risk. And so if you give somebody the power to maybe play around, maybe they spin something up in a sandbox environment, and that doesn't meet your organizational standards. So at the RBAC level, you can actually restrict who has access to provision specific services. And so resource providers allows you to do that. Quotas are another native mechanism to limit resource consumption. You can think of them as basically soft limits that help to prevent over-provisioning and surprise bills. So you can strategically prevent teams from exceeding expected levels, especially if this is in some sort of shared or sandbox environment, by setting quota limits. So this last one, infrastructure as code, is worth calling out. It's not something that we can spend a ton of time on today. But when you codify your standards and configurations, you ensure repeatability, security, and cost awareness from the start. This topic really does deserve its own dedicated session, and so I'm hoping to do a future webinar specifically on infrastructure as code. But when you build some of these governance pieces into infrastructure as code, now all of a sudden you are going to be explicitly defining what is going to be deployed in your environment with all of your best practices and organizational standards already built in. So as we continue, think of all of these tools as those guardrails that empower engineers to move faster with confidence, knowing that the best practices are already built in. So
Brian,
I want to,
quick comment
yeah,
before you go to the next slide.
Yep.
For anyone in the audience that doesn't have the chat pulled up, if you have any questions as Brian gets into the weeds here, we want to make sure that this resonates and that any questions that come up in your mind, that we've got the opportunity to address those. So as we get deeper into the weeds, feel free to ask any questions. And then Tyler Howard, who's our marketing director at CloudServus, and myself will be monitoring the chat. So feel free to post any questions you have in the chat, and then we'll get those questions asked to Brian. But sorry for the interruption there, Brian.
All good. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and one other thing, I'm flipping over to a page that has some links. I'll include these links. We'll include these links as part of the follow-up as well. Really, all of this jumps into kind of some Microsoft documentation, but it becomes helpful when paired with the content that I'm sharing, because it jumps specifically to some of the topics. So one thing I missed is I was going to show a little bit of a sample of the Resource Graph Explorer and the use of tags and querying power state. So maybe I'll circle back on that at the end of the webinar. But since we've already shifted to governance, I want to talk about Azure policy, and I'm going to show you a really interesting GitHub repository where there's built-in samples of policies. So there are literally thousands of different policies and initiatives that you can take directly as built-in policies. You can also create custom, and we'll get into that in a minute. But this GitHub repository has tons of already pre-scripted, predefined policies that you can use within your environment. So if I jump back, so what is Azure policy before we, I guess, dig into some of the examples? Well, Azure policy is Microsoft's native governance tool. It's built directly into the platform, and it's available at no extra cost, like we talked about. At its core, Azure policy helps organizations define, enforce, and audit rules across their Azure resources automatically. So whether it's restricting specific VM sizes, whether it's enforcing tag requirements, or ensuring certain services aren't deployed in specific regions, Azure policy helps to keep your environment in check without relying on manual reviews. And one of the most powerful impacts of Azure policy is its ability to not only audit and report on its findings, but also to enforce compliance by denying non-compliant deployments from the start. So let me jump into some of the pre-built policies. So these are some pre-built policies that and initiatives. An initiative is really just a set of policies. So let's look at two categories here. One is the compliance initiatives, and the second is the governance policies. So first, with built-in compliance initiatives, Microsoft provides prepackaged initiatives that map to some of the popular industry frameworks. These are collections of policies around like the CIS benchmark, which is good for security configuration best practices, or HIPAA High Trust, which is critical for healthcare and protected health information. So these aren't the only built-in compliance initiatives. I thought these were some of the more relevant ones that we see in here. But these are initiatives that you can enable instantly within your environment, and then they provide an audit of the resources throughout your subscriptions to be able to tell you what's in compliance and what's not. So then you have built-in governance policies. So Azure, like I mentioned, includes hundreds or thousands really of built-in governance policies that can help create these guardrails like we're talking about. And a few of the examples here that are probably pretty easy to, I guess, understand in this context would be like allowed storage account SKUs. So with this, you can prevent the use of premium storage when standard storage will suffice, for example. This allowed resource type would limit creation of non-approved services. The allowed locations would enforce geo location or geo boundaries or data residency rules. The allowed VM SKUs would restrict usage to cost-effective VMs. So there's all kinds of different policies that we can apply that provide these guardrails that help your teams move quickly while staying compliant with these policies. So you don't have to build all of this from scratch, even though there are all of these built-in policy definitions that you can use to audit and enforce. You can also customize or build custom policies to match your specific organization's needs. So when you build these, you can enforce your own internal governance standards, cost controls, and tagging requirements. And those would be tailored specifically to how your organization operates. Now, there's a lot there. So Float can help cut through the noise by identifying what are some of the most impactful policies that we see applied, and make sure that it's tailored based on your specific needs as an organization. And we can also help build custom policies to close gaps and enforce unique operational standards that you may have. So let's take just a moment to look at what happens when FinOps, CloudOps, and the well-architected framework work in alignment. So first thing is we ensure that all teams, engineering, finance, and operations are working towards shared KPIs. No more isolated goals pulling in different directions. Next, we break down the silos. FinOps isn't just for finance. CloudOps isn't just for IT. Everyone has visibility and a role in governance, efficiency, and performance. And so we want to break down those silos as much as possible. Continuous optimization, there's shared accountability where you build a culture of iterative improvement. You don't have to tackle it all at once. You're not reacting to the issues at the end of the month. You're starting to proactively tune your environment iteratively in real time. And finally, all this translates into measurable business value. There's faster time to market, reduced spend, better performance, and greater confidence in the cloud investments. When these pillars align, cloud moves from purely kind of an operational mode to really moving into something that becomes way more strategic for the organization. So I know we've covered a lot. We're coming up on the end of time. If you're feeling like you've uncovered more questions than answers, that's okay because I threw a lot at you. The reality is that getting started with FinOps and governance in Azure can feel quite overwhelming, especially when you're already balancing innovation, velocity, and cost control internally. So these are just a few steps that will help you to focus. You know, first and foremost, you want to kind of assess your current state. Then you want to identify where there's gaps and risks. And then you want to start small. Start small with some simple guardrails that aren't going to, really impede anybody's progress. And if you run into anything that you may need some assistance, ask for help. And that's where Float and CloudServus come in. We support customers of all sizes across industries improve cloud outcomes. So whether your cloud spend is a few thousand or a few million, we've had experience across all, and we're here to help you maximize that investment. So when you think about CloudServus and Float and how we work together, really CloudServus brings a deep Azure technical expertise. Specifically, they've helped or can help with migrations, infrastructure planning, policy enforcement, and operational readiness. They have dozens and dozens of Azure customers that they're helping in this capacity every day. And Float brings a platform-driven approach to cloud financial management and operational efficiency. So what that means is our software platform, our proprietary software platform that centralizes and tracks FinOps and Azure maturity plans, it helps in a way that makes it easy for engineering and IT leaders to adopt. So rather than trying to build something from scratch internally, we can really come in and meet customers where they're at. And it's not really just about cost savings, although those do come pretty quickly when we're engaged. It's about empowering your engineers. We can give them automation scripts, visibility, and tools that let them move fast with those guardrails in place. And all that means that there's going to be better decision making, more efficient operations, and less time wasted chasing down spend or anomalies in your environment. So together we help you define the strategy, execute the plan, and leave your team better equipped to run a scalable, cost-efficient, and high-performing Azure environment. And with that, I want to wrap us up. I'm going to leave everyone with some contact information here. So once again, I appreciate everybody's time for spending part of the day with us. I know we covered a lot in a short amount of time. If you're wondering where to start or how this applies, we'd love to help you. We're offering this free Azure efficiency review to attendees. And this really isn't just a generic report. We'll actually dig into your Azure subscriptions and show you real-world visibility dashboards. We can walk through policies and even highlight quick wins that you can act on right away. This is a chance to see everything that we've got to offer in action and everything that we've talked about. And so we'd love to book a call for an intro if we've already not been introduced. And we're also going to be following up by the end of the day tomorrow with a recording of this webinar, and it'll include the links like I mentioned as well. So with that, I'll open the floor for any questions and feedback, and thanks again everyone for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys. And if there's any final questions, just post them in the chat. I do have a question for you, Brian. I'm hearing rumblings of a more technical part 2.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of this is there's so much to cover, so many different topics. We can go off on any number of different tangents within this, and I think that's why, I mean, CloudServus and FLOAT are uniquely kind of aligned here, because we can take this very holistic approach and really like boil it down for you, right? If you're trying to sort through all of this yourself, like I said, there's just so much to try and know and understand. And combined, we have resources that have been working in Microsoft Azure since one of my colleagues likes to call it the Project Red Dog days. So before it was even called Microsoft Azure. And so with that, we stay on top of what's new, what's coming, how it can be applied in environments. So like together, we can bring just a tremendous amount of value to our customers.
Excellent. Well, I don't think there's any more questions on the chat. So any final comments, Brian?
I will say, if anybody has any recommendations for webinar topics, we are looking to formalize something a little bit more regularly. We'd like to keep it to 30-minute topics, but if this was helpful for you, feel free to shoot us an email or respond in chat or wherever, and just let us know what might be helpful for you.
Yep. And as Brian mentioned, feel free to reach out to either of these aliases, and we can set up a more personalized conversation and see, kind of dig into your individual environment and challenges as well. So, but yeah, appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Brian, for putting this together and putting this on, and Tyler as well. And you'll have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.